5 brothers were born into the famous Sparta Pride of Sabi Sand. 3 of them were born in the year 2000, and the other 2 were born in 2002. These 5 males were sired by the reigning West Street Coalition. The Sparta Pride was joined by a young subadult male who was believed to be son of West Street males from the Selati Pride. This young male became the full member of the Pride after taking a few beatings from the Sparta Pride females. He would later be called Makhulu. In 2004, these 6 brothers were pushed out of the Pride and became nomadic. Instead, moving out as individuals, they became a strong group of 6. Together, this band of brothers was named the Mapogos. Even though they were 6 strong and had numbers advantage over any other coalition, they were inexperienced and they were not big enough to take over. During their nomadic days, these young brothers spent their time moving through the territories of other strong males. This was a risky move, as dominant males don't tolerate intruders in their area. In the year 2006, the young Mapogos started to advertise their presence. They were now big enough and strong enough to establish a significant territory of their own. These 6 young and confident brothers quickly took over their first territory just a few months later. As a coalition of 6, they were the largest coalition in the entire Sabi Sand. And by using their numbers advantage, 6 Mapogos started taking over pride after pride. They would kill any dominant male that would dare to stand for his territory, any cub sired by the previous kings, and any lioness that would try to defend her cubs. In just a few months of taking over their first territory, 6 Mapogos were dominant over half of the reserve. In the year 2008, the 2 youngest Mapogos, Mr. T and Kinky Tail, decided to explore new territory. They arrived in eastern Sabi Sand and started scouting this new area. During that time, the Sparta and Styx Pride were under control of Roller Coaster Male. Both Mapogo males sneaked up on the dominant male, but lionesses were having none of it. They aggressively attacked Mr. T and Kinky Tail, who retreated to avoid the wrath of the entire pride. The dominant male of the pride managed to escape meanwhile. Mr. T and Kinky Tail went back to Western Sector. Just a few days later, Kinky Tail and Mr. T returned. But this time around, they had serious backup. Their brothers, Rasta, Pretty Boy, and Deadlocks were following the youngest pair of Kinky Tail and Mr. T. It was clear that a bloodbath was on its way. Soon after arriving, the Mapogos quickly took over Styx and the Sparta Pride. Defense of Styx lionesses was broken, as 5 angry males were way too much for them to handle. By that time, Mapogo Coalition seemed invincible, and they had 8 prides under their control. They controlled almost all of Sabi Sand, just leaving the southern section of the reserve. Mr. T and Kinky Tail stayed in the eastern sector while their 3 brothers returned to western Sabi Sand to join Makhulu. Over the next year, the strong duo of Mr. T and Kinky Tail stood guard and defended their territory against many intruders. They were not only defending their territory in the east, but also their brothers in the west, as the entire western part of the reserve was fenced. The only way to enter western sector was through Mr. T and Kinky Tail. In the year 2010, it had been 4 years since the Mapogos had taken over their first territory. They had defended the territory against multiple intruders, but they were about to meet the biggest challenge they had ever faced. A coalition of 5 young Majingilane males entered the Mapogo territory. These 5 brothers were between 4 and 5 years old, and they had their sights set on the rich domain of the Mapogo coalition. At the beginning, Majingilane males avoided the conflict and they kept a low profile. But as time passed on, they started to advertise their presence by roaring and scent marking. When the 2 dominant individuals heard the roars of unknown males, they arrived in northeastern part of the territory to learn that their land was scent marked by new males. These 2 brothers had never lost a fight with other males, so they accepted the challenge. On June 8, 2010, the Mapogo males arrived following the noises of the invaders. In a thick bush, a member of the young Majingilane coalition was resting. When he realized the presence of the dominant males, he tried to flatter himself in the bushes. By that time, Mr. T and Kinky Tail had not spotted the intruder, but they were definitely aware of his presence. They began to sniff the air and were getting closer. The young Majingilane male saw the dominant males moving closer and closer and decided to flee. He quickly shot out of the bush in order to escape, but it was too late. Both dominant Mapogo brothers chased the intruder for a few meters before finally catching him. They immediately launched a serious attack. The thunderous noises of the battle were heard all over the surrounding areas. Young Majingilane was in mortal danger as the infamous Mapogo brothers were tearing and slicing him apart. Although the young male gave it his all, he never stood a chance against such a dominant force. Both hind legs were bitten and bleeding. His pelvis was shattered and massive cuts in flesh were clearly visible. Both Mapogo males were also injured during the battle. Mr. T had a gash over his eye, and Kinky Tail was seen with a massive limp. He was bitten through his front paw. Both Mapogo males went into the shade of a tree, while the Majingilane was left to die. During that same evening, the remaining 4 Majingilane males were on the move. It was clear that they had the sense of the incident involving the death of their brother, and they were coming for vengeance. Under the cover of darkness, the 4 Majingilane males managed to isolate injured Kinky Tail and started to rip him apart. Outnumbered, he was quickly overwhelmed and intruders pinned him down with sheer power. Mr. T tried to rescue his brother, but he was also beaten down by the 2 Majingilane males. Mr. T tucked tail and ran for his life. The 4 Majingilane males chased Mr. T, but he successfully managed to escape. The intruders returned to helpless Kinky Tail after failing to catch Mr. T. They wanted to end their enemy, and they did so by eating Kinky Tail while he was still alive. They ate his tail and entire hind legs while he was breathing. The intruders then proceeded to roar and advertise themselves as the new rulers of the area. Over the next few weeks, Mr. T was seen in the company of Selati Pride. He was calling for his brother, but instead of Kinky Tail, his calls were heard by the new dominant Majingilane males who once again attacked Mr.